All right, so we're diving into these awesome English speaking tips. And guess what? We're going to use storytelling to help you guys get there. I've been really digging through all these tips, and some of them are so cool. Did you know that simply narrating your day, even just making breakfast or walking the dog, can make a huge difference? There's this story about Jane, who was super shy about speaking, but she started doing that, just narrating her day, and her fluency just took off.
You know, it's funny. We often underestimate how powerful just those everyday activities can be. For language learning, it's all about creating a consistent habit of thinking and speaking in English.
Yeah. I used to struggle with this whole think in English thing. I'd be translating everything in my head before I could even say a word. It was exhausting. And my conversations just felt so clunky. What are some ways to actually shift your thinking into English mode?
Well, that's a common challenge. One really effective technique is to start small. So instead of trying to translate entire sentences, just focus on single words or short phrases. For example, when you see a cat, just think cat in English, not your native language. And then as you get more comfortable, gradually increase the complexity. Another helpful tip is to use visual aids. So surround yourself with English labels, posters, even sticky notes. This constant visual reminder will kind of just nudge your brain to start thinking in English.
So it's like training your brain to make those automatic connections, right? Instead of going through that extra translation step.
Exactly. And speaking of training, the source material really emphasizes the importance of daily practice, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. The key is consistency. Think of it like working out a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
And this story about Raj totally proves your point. He was really focused on improving his pronunciation. So he started imitating the dialogue from his favorite movies, paying attention to the actor's intonation and everything. And guess what? It totally worked. He started to sound so much more natural and fluent.
You know what Raj was doing was actually quite clever. He was intuitively tapping into the power of mimicry, which is a fundamental aspect of language acquisition.
Yeah.
When we imitate native speakers, we're not just copying sounds, we're absorbing the subtle nuances of the language, the rhythm, the stress patterns, even the emotional tone.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. It's like when we learn our first language as babies, we're constantly mimicking what we hear around us. So why not apply that same principle to learning English?
Exactly. And this leads us to another crucial point that's emphasized in the source material: learning phrases, not just isolated words.
Okay, this is something I've heard before, but honestly, I never fully understood why it was so important. Can you explain a bit more about the benefits of learning phrases instead of just memorizing individual words?
Sure. So when we learn phrases, we're not just acquiring vocabulary, we're also grasping how words work together. In natural flowing speech, for example, instead of just learning the words give and hand, we learn the phrase, could you give me a hand? This teaches us the grammatical structure, the idiomatic usage, and the natural rhythm of the language.
Oh, so those common phrases become building blocks for conversations. It's much more efficient than trying to piece together individual words in the moment.
Exactly. Imagine trying to build a house brick by brick versus using prefabricated walls. Phrases are those prefabricated walls of language. They help you communicate more fluently and naturally. The source even gives some great examples, like what's up or how's it going?
I never thought of it that way. That's actually a really helpful analogy. So instead of getting bogged down with individual words, we should focus on those everyday phrases and how they're used in context. That's a fantastic takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the beauty of it is you encounter these phrases all the time. In movies.
Yeah.
Music. And everyday conversations. Start paying attention to them. Write them down. And practice using them in your own interactions.
Yeah. I love that. All right, so we've talked about the importance of thinking in English, practicing consistently, and learning phrases. But let's get even more practical. This source has a whole section on using stories to improve fluency. And I have to admit, I was a little skeptical at first, but then they started talking about visualizing the story and really bringing it to life with details. And it clicked for me. I actually tried it with the sample story they gave about a weekend hike. And it was amazing. I felt like I was reliving the experience as I was telling the story in English. Do you find that using your senses helps you remember things better when you're learning a language?
Absolutely. Our brains are wired to remember things that are emotionally charged and sensory rich. So when you actively engage your senses while you're telling a story in English, like the sights, sounds, smells, you're creating those stronger neural connections, making it much easier to recall the vocabulary and the grammar. It's like turning your brain into a high-definition movie studio.
I love that analogy. It makes so much sense. And speaking of making things stick, this source also recommends recording yourself speaking English. Oh, I used to cringe when I would listen back to my early recordings. But it really helped me pinpoint areas where I needed to improve. It was like having a personal language coach in my pocket.
Yeah, such a valuable tool
Yeah.
for self-assessment. You can hear your pronunciation, your intonation, the overall flow of your speech. You might notice things you weren't even aware of, like maybe using filler words too often or speaking too
Oh,
quickly.
totally. I used to say and like all the time. But hearing it back on a recording made me so much more conscious of it. And over time, I was able to break those habits.
Exactly. It's all about becoming aware of
Yeah.
your own speech patterns and then making those conscious efforts to improve.
Yeah, for sure. You know, another thing that really stood out to me in these tips was the power of asking questions. It seems so simple,
Yeah.
but it's such an effective way to keep conversations flowing and build your confidence.
Asking questions not only demonstrates your engagement, but it also encourages the other person to share their thoughts and experiences. It kind of takes the pressure off of you to constantly come up with things to say, and it creates a more dynamic and engaging interaction.
Right. And they suggest using those open-ended questions like, what do you think about? Or
Yeah.
how is your seat? Which is a great tip. Those kinds of questions invite more detailed responses and give you more opportunities to listen and learn.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. If you don't understand something, native speakers are usually happy to explain or rephrase things. It shows that you're actively listening and you're eager to learn.
Absolutely. It's all about showing genuine interest and engaging with the conversation. Okay, one last tip from this section that I found really intriguing: expanding your vocabulary with context.
Yeah, learning new words in isolation can be a bit like trying to memorize a phone book. It's dry and it's difficult to retain. But when you encounter words in context, within sentences and stories, they come alive. They suddenly have meaning and purpose.
Yeah, they give the example of the word serene used in the sentence. The lake was serene, surrounded by mountains. And it's so true. You can instantly picture the scene and understand the feeling the word is trying to convey.
Exactly. The sentence provides clues to the meaning of the word serene. You can infer that it describes a peaceful, calm, and tranquil atmosphere. And that visual imagery helps cement the word in your memory.
Okay, so I've always kind of found the idea of role-playing a bit intimidating, but this source makes a really compelling case for it. They say it's like a dress rehearsal for real-life conversations, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like a safe space to experiment, make mistakes, and build your confidence. Think about those situations where you might feel a little nervous using English, like ordering food, asking for directions, making a phone call. Role-play those scenarios can really help you feel more prepared and less anxious when you actually encounter them in real life.
Right. They even provide this example scenario of ordering at a cafe. Want to give it a try?
Sure.
Okay, so imagine I'm the customer and you're the barista. Okay, I'm feeling brave. I'm going to go for it. Hi there. I'd love to try one of your lattes. What would you recommend?
Okay, welcome to our cafe. We have a variety of delicious lattes. Do you prefer something sweet, or are you looking for more of a classic flavor?
I'm feeling adventurous today. What's your most unique latte?
Let's see. Our lavender honey latte is a customer favorite. It's a beautiful balance of floral and sweet notes.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'll have that, please.
Excellent choice. One lavender honey latte coming right up.
See?
Yeah.
That wasn't so bad. I actually felt pretty comfortable using those phrases and responding in real time.
Yeah. And the more you practice, the more natural it'll become. You can even involve friends or family members in your role plays to make it even more fun and interactive.
That's a great idea. It kind of turns language practice into a game almost. Okay, so the source also talks about the benefits of joining English-speaking communities. And they share this really cool story about Ahmed, who joined an English-speaking book club. Not only did his speaking improve, but he also made new friends and expanded his cultural horizons.
Yeah. Ahmed's story really highlights the social and emotional benefits of language learning. It's not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and broadening your perspectives.
It's about finding your tribe, those people who share your passion for the language and can support you on your learning journey.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is there are so many different types of communities out there, like book clubs, hiking groups, online forums, language exchange partners.
So think about your interests, your hobbies, your goals. What kind of community would you feel most comfortable in, most engaged in?
Yeah, the key is to find a space where you can use English authentically and connect with people who share your passions.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into these incredible English speaking tips. I have to say, I've learned so much from going through all these sources with you.
It's been a pleasure exploring these techniques together. Remember, the most important thing is to enjoy the process, embrace the challenges, celebrate those victories, and never stop exploring the beautiful world of language.
Yes. And for all of you listening out there, remember that fluency comes one step at a time. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Until next time, happy speaking.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to unlock some of the secrets of fluent English.
I think we all know that feeling. Like you understand the individual words, but something's missing.
It's like everyone else is in on a joke and you're left out.
Exactly. And that's where idioms come in, right? They're like these little cultural puzzles that can really trip you up.
And today, we're going deep into the world of idioms, tackling a list of 21 that are key to taking your English from intermediate to advanced, really sounding more natural and fluent.
And you know, idioms aren't just about sounding good, are they? They often give us a glimpse into the history and the culture of a language.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll be unpacking not just what these idioms mean, but also where they come from and how to use them effectively in different situations.
And maybe even a few funny stories along the way. So are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's get started with our first idiom, a blessing in disguise. Have you ever experienced something that seemed bad at first, but turned out to be a good thing in the end?
I think we all have. It's like that feeling when you miss a flight and then you find out it got delayed for hours anyway.
Exactly. Or maybe you didn't get the job you really wanted, but ended up with an even better opportunity. It's those moments when we realize that things happen for a reason.
And that sometimes what we perceive as setbacks can actually lead us to something much better.
It's like the universe has a plan, right?
Right. And speaking of getting to the point, our next idiom is beat around the bush. I think we're all guilty of this sometimes, especially when we have to have a difficult conversation.
Oh, for sure. Instead of just coming out and saying what we mean, we kind of dance around the topic, hoping the other person will figure it out.
Yeah, like when you want to ask for a raise, but you start talking about how much you love your job and how dedicated you are.
Instead of just saying, hey, I think I deserve a raise.
Right. It's that awkward feeling of wanting to address something, but not wanting to be too direct.
So how do we break out of that beating around the bush habit? Any tips for being more direct?
Well, I think being mindful of it is the first step, recognizing when we're doing it, and then just practicing being more straightforward, even if it feels a little uncomfortable at first.
Now picture this. You're at a party, you don't know many people, and you want to start a conversation. That's where you need to break the ice.
Oh yes, break the ice. That's a classic one. It's all about easing that initial awkwardness, isn't it?
Exactly. It's about creating that first connection, like literally breaking through a sheet of ice to open up a pathway for conversation.
And sometimes it can be as simple as a compliment, you know, like, I love your shoes.
Or even a simple question like, have you tried any of the appetizers yet? Anything to get the conversation flowing.
Exactly. And, you know, sometimes humor can be a great icebreaker, too.
Oh, yeah. A well-timed joke can definitely lighten the mood.
It's all about finding that common ground, that shared moment of laughter.
Now, let's talk about something that can cost an arm and a leg. It's when something is just ridiculously expensive.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, have you seen the prices of concert tickets these days?
Oh my gosh, they're insane.
It's like they want you to give up a limb just to see your favorite band.
It's that feeling of, it's really worth that much.
Right? But sometimes you just gotta splurge, you know?
But let's talk about those satisfying moments when you get something exactly right, like when you hit the nail on the head.
Ah, yes, it's that feeling of nailing it, isn't it? Like when you perfectly describe a situation or you figure out the root cause of a problem.
With like that aha moment. And it likely comes from, you know, actually hammering a nail and getting it perfectly straight.
Right. And it's such a satisfying feeling, whether you're talking about solving a problem or just understanding a concept.
So have you ever hit the nail on the head with something recently?
Let me think. Oh, actually, just the other day, a friend was describing a situation they were going through, and I was able to offer some advice that really resonated with them. They said, I hit the nail on the head.
It's like you were able to see the situation clearly and offer the perfect solution.
Exactly. It felt good to be able to help.
Now, switching gears a bit, have you ever been feeling under the weather?
Ooh, I think we all know that feeling. It's that kind of blah feeling when you're just not quite yourself.
Right, like maybe you have a slight cold or just feel a bit run down.
And no one wants to hear all your symptoms.
Exactly. Under the weather is a much gentler way to say, I'm not feeling great.
And I've always wondered where that one came from.
Me too. I've heard it might be related to sailors feeling seasick when the weather was rough.
Oh, that makes sense. Like the weather is literally affecting how you feel.
Now be careful not to let the cat out of the bag.
Oops. That's when you accidentally reveal a secret, isn't it?
Exactly. Like if you're planning a surprise party and someone spills the beans to the guest of honor.
I've always loved the imagery with that one. Like imagine a cat jumping out of a bag and everyone's surprised.
It's such a vivid way to describe that moment of, oh no, I shouldn't have said that.
And it happens to the best of us.
So how do we avoid those cat out of the bag situations? Any tips for keeping secrets safe?
I think sometimes it's better not to know the secret at all if you're someone who tends to blurt things out.
That's a great point. If you don't know, you can't accidentally reveal it.
Exactly. Or, just be extra careful about who you talk to and what you say.
But sometimes you just have to accept that the ball is in your court.
Ah, yes. That's when it's someone else's turn to make a decision or take action.
It's like passing the baton in a relay race.
Exactly. You've done your part, and now it's up to them to decide what to do next.
It's often used in negotiations or discussions, right?
Yes, like when you've presented your offer and you're waiting for the other person to respond.
And sometimes, to get things done, you just have to burn the midnight oil.
Yeah, that's a good one. It means staying up late, working, usually on a project or deadline.
Back in the day, it literally meant working by the light of an oil lamp.
Right. But nowadays, it's more about that feeling of burning the candle at both ends.
But sometimes, you have to face those challenges head on, like when you have to bite the bullet.
It means doing something difficult or unpleasant, even though you don't want to.
Like going to the dentist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or having that tough conversation you've been putting off.
But on a brighter note, some things happen very rarely, like once in a blue moon.
Oh, I love this one. It's so poetic. And it actually refers to a real astronomical event,
Really?
Yeah, when a second full moon occurs within the same calendar month. It doesn't actually look blue, though.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's something that happens very infrequently.
Exactly. Like winning the lottery or seeing a unicorn.
Now, let's talk about maximizing efficiency. It's like when you kill two birds with one stone.
Yes. It's about accomplishing two things with one action, isn't it?
Like if you need to go to the post office and the grocery store, and they're right next to each other, you can do both errands in one trip.
Exactly. It's all about being smart with your time and effort.
And sometimes things are surprisingly easy, like a piece of cake.
Oh, yeah. That's a great way to say something was simple and effortless.
It makes it sound almost enjoyable, right? Like it was no trouble at all.
Exactly. Like, that exam was a piece of cake.
But be careful not to put all your eggs in one basket.
Oh, yes. That's a good reminder. It's about diversification, isn't it? Not putting all your hopes or resources into one thing.
Exactly. It's like spreading your risk so if one thing doesn't work out, you have others to fall back on.
Right. Like, don't invest all your money in one stock. Or don't rely on just one person for your happiness.
Speaking of revealing secrets, sometimes you accidentally spill the beans.
Oops. That's like letting the cat out of the bag. Right. But maybe a bit more unintentional.
Right. It's like you just blurt something out without thinking.
And it can be so embarrassing.
It is. Especially if it's a secret that you're supposed to keep.
Oh, for sure. But sometimes it's just a funny slip up.
But it's always important to consider different perspectives and not take everything at face value. That's when you take something with a grain of salt.
Yeah, it means being a little skeptical, doesn't it? Not believing everything you hear.
Especially in today's world, with so much information flying around, it's crucial to be discerning, to question things.
Right. Not everything is as it seems.
So how do you decide what to take with a grain of salt? What are some red flags?
That's a good question. I think it's about looking at the source of the information, Is it a reliable source?
And sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you just have to throw in the towel.
Yeah, that's when you admit defeat, isn't it? You realize it's time to give up.
It's like knowing when to walk away from a fight.
Right. It's not always easy, but sometimes it's the best thing to do.
And have you ever felt like you were barking up the wrong tree?
Oh, definitely. It's when you're pursuing a path or a solution that's just not going to work.
You're putting in all this effort, but you're headed in the wrong direction.
It's like you're lost in the woods and you keep going deeper and deeper, but you're not getting any closer to your destination.
Exactly. And sometimes it takes a while to realize that you're on the wrong track.
It does. But it's important to be able to recognize those dead ends and be willing to change course.
So how do you know when it's time to stop barking up the wrong tree and try a different approach?
I think it's about paying attention to the signs. If you're not making any progress, if you keep hitting roadblocks, it might be time to step back and reassess your strategy.
That's great advice. Now, wouldn't it be amazing to always have the best of both worlds?
That is the dream, isn't it? It's like having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly. It's about finding that perfect balance, that ideal situation where you get the advantages of two seemingly opposite things.
Like imagine working from home, but still having that sense of community and collaboration that comes from being in an office.
But sometimes you just have to throw caution to the wind and go for it.
Oh, absolutely. It's about embracing risk and spontaneity, letting go of your fears and just going for it.
It's like that feeling of freedom and excitement when you decide to do something unexpected.
Exactly. Like quitting your job to travel the world.
And finally, going above and beyond, giving it your all, that's going the extra mile.
It's about exceeding expectations, isn't it? Putting in that extra effort to make something truly special.
Like staying late to help a colleague finish a project or going out of your way to make a customer happy. It's those little things that make a big difference.
And, going the extra mile doesn't always have to be about work. It can be about anything, really.
Oh, absolutely. It's about that attitude of always striving to do your best.
Exactly. And it's something that people really appreciate, whether it's in your personal or professional life.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, explored 21 essential idioms. What stands out to you so far? Any favorites?
So many great ones. I think bite the bullet is one that really resonates with me. It's a reminder that sometimes we just have to face those challenges head on, even if it's uncomfortable. What about you?
I think the best of both worlds really appeals to me. That idea of finding balance and enjoying the benefits of different perspectives.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a reminder that we don't always have to choose one thing over another. Sometimes we can find a way to have it all.
Exactly. And that's a great note to end on for this part of our deep dive. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of these idioms, but we'll be back soon to explore even more of their nuances and applications.
Looking forward to it. I think for me, bite the bullet is one of the ones that really stands out.
Yeah, I get that. Knowing the history behind it too, like, wow.
It just highlights that kind of courage,
Right.
that we need to face things we don't really want to.
Like steeling yourself, getting ready.
Totally.
And have you ever had to bite the bullet recently?
Oh, all the time. I think we all do, right?
Yeah.
But one that comes to mind is I remember having to give a presentation to, a huge audience.
Ooh, that's tough.
Yeah. And I was so terrified, but I knew I just had to bite the bullet, get up there and do it.
And I bet once you did, it wasn't so bad.
It's always like that, right? The anticipation is worse.
The build-up. And it makes you stronger too, each time.
Oh, absolutely. And that actually makes me think of barking up the wrong tree, because sometimes you think you're, doing the right thing.
Putting in all this effort.
And then you realize, oh, this is a dead end.
You're headed in the wrong direction.
Completely. And that happens a lot, I think, especially today with so much information.
Oh, yeah. It's overwhelming.
It really is. And so it's easy to get sidetracked.
Yeah, to go down rabbit holes.
But I think there's a lot of value in recognizing that you're doing that.
Totally.
And then you can say, okay, well, what other options do I have? How else can I approach this?
It's about being flexible, being adaptable.
Yeah, and I think that leads us nicely to the best of both worlds, because...
Ooh, the ideal.
Right. Because sometimes you do have to choose one or the other, but sometimes you can find a way to get the benefits of both.
To kind of merge them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, having that flexibility of working remotely, but also still having that in-person connection.
Yeah, that sense of community.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to throw caution to the wind.
And just go for it.
Right.
I love those moments.
Those are the best, those spontaneous decisions.
Absolutely. Even if it's a little bit scary, a little bit risky.
Like quitting your job to travel the world.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
But so freeing. Right.
It is. And I think those are the moments that really can shape our lives.
Yeah, those leaps of faith.
For sure.
And then it's about putting in that extra effort, going the extra mile.
Yes, it's like going above and beyond.
Right, really making a difference.
Yeah, exceeding those expectations.
So have you gone the extra mile for anything lately?
I've been really focused on a project at work.
Okay.
I've been, putting in the extra hours and really trying to make sure it's the best it can be.
To make it shine.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how to use these idioms, but I think it's also interesting to think about what they reveal about about the culture of English speakers.
What do you think?
Well, I think one theme that keeps coming up is hard work, perseverance.
Yeah, I see that. Like, bite the bullet, burn the midnight oil. It's like you push through those challenges.
You don't give up.
Exactly.
You get it done.
And then you also have throw caution to the wind, which is more about that kind of risk-taking spirit.
Yeah, that adventurous side.
So it's interesting. It's like there's that balance.
Of both.
Yeah, you work hard, but you're not afraid to try new things and take a chance.
And the best of both worlds speaks to that, that balance, compromise.
Yeah, like finding the middle ground.
Yeah.
Trying to see things from different perspectives.
And take it with a grain of salt, which is kind of like, don't believe everything you hear, right?
Question things.
Be a critical thinker.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what would you say are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think don't be afraid to start using these idioms. You know, the more you use them, the more natural they'll feel.
Practice makes perfect.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to remember that idioms are more than just words. They're really a window into the culture.
Yeah, they tell us something about the values and the beliefs of the people who use them.
So pay attention to how people use them in different contexts, and you'll start to pick up on those nuances.
Yeah, you'll gain a deeper understanding, not just of the language, but of the culture as well.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how much we can learn just from these little phrases. It's like they're little time capsules of culture. So let's talk a little bit more about that connection between language and culture.
Yeah.
Do you think the idioms we use, do they actually influence how we think?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question.
Right. It makes you wonder, like, if these phrases that we use all the time, if they kind of subtly shape our perceptions of the world, like spill the beans, for example, does that say something about a culture that values discretion?
Yeah.
Or does using that idiom actually reinforce that value, make us more aware of keeping secrets?
Yeah, it's like, which came first?
The chicken or the egg?
Exactly. Does language reflect culture, or does it shape it?
Or maybe a bit of both.
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
You know, it's this kind of back and forth between the words we use and how we see the world.
And that makes me think about throw caution to the wind, too.
Yeah.
Does that reflect a culture that's maybe more prone to taking risks?
Yeah, or does it encourage us to be more adventurous, you know?
Right, to embrace those leaps of faith and the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Does that suggest that we like balance, compromise, or does it actually encourage us to seek out those win-win situations?
Yeah. It's really fascinating to think about.
It's like language is this tool that can both reflect and influence our values and beliefs.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes learning idioms, you know, so much fun. Yeah. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about what they tell us about the culture and about ourselves, really.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these 21 essential idioms, what would you say is your biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Don't just memorize them, experience them.
Ooh, I love that.
You know, listen for them when you hear people talking, when you watch movies, when you listen to music.
See how they're using them in real life.
Exactly. And try using them yourself. You know, the more you use them,
the more natural they'll feel.
Absolutely.
And it's like anything else you're learning. The more you immerse yourself, the more it becomes part of you. And the more you explore language, the more you appreciate its beauty and its power.
It's true. Language it's a gift.
It is.
You know, it's a way to connect with other people and to understand different cultures.
To build bridges.
Exactly. And idioms are like little gems.
They are.
That add so much richness to our communication.
So keep exploring, keep discovering, and keep diving deep into the world of words.
Yes.
Who knows what treasures you'll uncover.
Happy exploring. And until next time, may your conversations be filled with colorful idioms and insightful discoveries. Hey there, fellow bookworms. Ready to level up your reading game? Today we're going deep, way past just finishing a book.
Yeah, think Reading Ninja. This is your secret decoder ring for unlocking those hidden layers of meaning in anything you read.
And our guide. This awesome piece, 7 tips to improve your reading at an advanced level. Practical advice, not just theory.
Totally. And it uses some really cool examples like switching between Great Gatsby and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, you know, to really stretch those reading muscles.
I love that, reading against the grain. It's so easy to stay in our comfort zones. What about you? What do you usually gravitate towards? What would be a surprising genre for you?
Oh, good question. I tend to lean towards nonfiction history biographies, that kind of thing. But to shake things up, maybe a graphic novel or poetry. I don't read a ton of poetry.
I get that. I love a good mystery, but I've been meaning to try more sci-fi, see what's out there. Which brings us to tip number 1, diversify your reading diet. The source is all about exploring different genres, styles, and topics.
Makes sense, right? Like food. You don't want to eat the same thing every day. You miss out on all those flavors and nutrients. Same with reading. Each genre has its own strengths, its own way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And they even suggest this cool activity. Read a news article on climate change, then read a poem on the same topic. See how different forms of writing can change your understanding.
That's such a good idea. The news article gives you the facts, right? But the poem might explore the emotional side, the impact on people. 2 totally different angles, but both important for understanding the whole picture.
Totally. Tip number 2 is all about active reading, something I'm always working on. It's about engaging with the text, not just skimming.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens. Active reading is like having a conversation with the author, asking questions, pushing back, making those connections in your own mind.
The source talks about the SQ3R method. Can you break that down for us? Why is it so helpful, especially with really complex texts?
I see SQ3R as a brain hack for better reading. It stands for survey, question, read, recite, review. Especially with dense stuff, it makes you slow down and engage on different levels. Like if you're reading the Federalist Papers, before diving in, you'd survey the structure, maybe skim headings or topic sentences.
So kind of setting the stage, getting an overview.
Exactly. Then you come up with questions based on what you see. What are the main points? What arguments is the author making? Now you're actively searching for answers as you read.
It's like a detective game.
Yes. Then the read phase, where you actively look for those answers.
Wait.
Next, you recite or summarize what you read in your own words. This helps solidify your understanding. And finally, review to make sure you remember the key points.
Intense, but it sounds super effective, especially for those brain bender books.
A mental workout, but a good one.
Okay, tip number 3 always gets me excited. Expanding our vocabulary. They suggest keeping a vocabulary journal, which sounds fun.
Like building your arsenal of words.
But what about those words that just completely stump you, like singularity in Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time? I remember just staring at that one, completely lost.
I know that feeling. You got to become a word detective. Context is everything. You can often figure out the meaning using root words, prefixes, suffixes, break it down into smaller parts.
Like solving a puzzle. And once you crack the code, that word unlocks a whole new level of understanding. I had that with epistemology in a philosophy book. I finally broke it down. Episteme meaning knowledge and logos meaning study. Boom, the study of knowledge.
It's the best feeling. And those aha moments build on each other. Every new word opens up more understanding. You can tackle even more complex stuff.
Brain leveling up. Tip number 4 is where it gets interesting. Author's craft. Understanding the why behind an author's choices.
It's like peeking behind the curtain, seeing the magician's secrets.
Totally. They use 1984 as an example how Orwell creates that feeling of oppression through his writing. What are some clues we can look for to get an author's purpose?
Oh, so many. Tone, imagery, sentence structure, rhetorical devices, they all add up. Like, think about it. A short, choppy sentence creates urgency, tension, right? But a long, flowing one might feel more thoughtful.
Like composing music with words, using different instruments to create different effects.
Great analogy. And you, as the reader, start to pick up on those little cues. You see how everything plays a role. Word choice, pacing, even punctuation.
Like learning a secret language. They suggest analyzing a paragraph from Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse to really examine the sentence structure. I challenge you, try that with anything you're reading. Pick a passage and dissect it. It's amazing what you find.
I agree. Ask yourself, what choices are they making and why? You'll see patterns, appreciate the craft even more.
Okay, tip number 5 gets into summarizing and critical thinking. Essential skills for any advanced reader. I'll admit, sometimes I just want to get lost in the story, but slowing down to analyze is crucial too.
It's like the difference between watching a movie passively versus really engaging with it. When you summarize, you got to boil things down to the essence, really understand the main points. Critical thinking is about questioning assumptions, looking at different perspectives, and evaluating the evidence.
They talk about summarizing an article on AI, which is constantly changing. Imagine trying to sum up all those complex ideas.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
But so valuable. Critical thinking is even more important now. We're bombarded with information from everywhere. You got to be able to tell fact from opinion, bias from objectivity.
It's about being a smart consumer of information, not just believing everything you read.
Exactly. And a great way to practice those skills is joining a book club or discussion group.
Have you ever read Thoreau's Civil Disobedience? Talk about sparking debate. Those ideas about individual conscience versus the state are still so relevant. Imagine discussing that in a book club. Things could get heated in a good way.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that one. A book club is like having your own team of experts to bounce ideas off of. You hear different interpretations, challenge your own assumptions. You might discover things you missed on your own.
It's like having multiple lenses to view the same material. Plus, you might find new authors or genres you wouldn't have tried otherwise. And it's just fun to geek out with other book lovers.
Totally. It's a built-in support system for your reading journey.
Speaking of support, ready for tip number 6. This one might surprise you. Reading aloud.
I know, right? It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but trust me, there are benefits, especially for complex texts.
They even suggest trying it with Shakespearean sonnets. To appreciate the rhythm and flow, like adding another dimension to the words.
It is. It forces you to slow down, enunciate clearly, savor the language. Especially helpful with poetry, but even with prose it makes a difference. Imagine tackling a dense philosophical argument out loud. It becomes so much clearer.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. It's like using more of your senses to engage with the material.
Exactly. And remember, we learned language through sound first. Reading aloud taps into that. Plus, think about when we were kids reading aloud together. We learned so much that way.
I loved those read-alouds in school. And the source even says, record yourself reading aloud and listen back.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It might feel awkward, but it's a fantastic way to see where you stumble, work on pronunciation, improve fluency, like your own personal coach.
I'm adding that to my toolkit. Okay, our final tip. Goal setting. I'm all about goals, but sometimes I'm not sure where to start, especially with something as broad as reading.
I get that. The source uses War and Peace as an example, which is a big one. But they have a great point. Break down big goals into smaller chunks.
So instead of I'm going to read War and Peace, it's I'm going to read 50 pages a week.
Exactly. It feels much less scary.
Yeah.
And you get that sense of accomplishment as you hit those smaller milestones.
And there are great tools to help you track your progress. I love Goodreads. It's so motivating to see what you've read, find new books, share your thoughts.
It's a great community for book lovers.
Yeah.
And speaking of community, they mentioned book clubs again. There's nothing like connecting with other readers and really diving deep together.
It's like a cheering squad for your reading journey. So we've covered a lot. Diversifying our reading, active reading, vocabulary, author's craft, summarizing, reading aloud, and goal setting. It's been quite the exploration of becoming a more advanced reader.
It has. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to take their reading to that next level.
Me too. You know, as we wrap up this part, it makes me think about the power of reading. It's not just about knowledge. It's about understanding the world and ourselves better.
That's beautifully put. It's about empathy, critical thinking, opening ourselves up to new perspectives and possibilities.
Exactly. And it's a journey that never really ends. There's always something new to discover, a new connection to make.
And with the right tools and techniques, we can keep growing as readers our whole lives.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this segment of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. What's one book or article you've always wanted to read, but felt intimidated by?
What's that one that's been sitting on your shelf, whispering promises of adventure?
Maybe it's a classic, a dense philosophical work, or something scientific that's always intrigued you. Now is the time to embrace the challenge.
Use the tips we've discussed and approach it with confidence, curiosity, a sense of adventure. You might be surprised.
Now, before we move on to part 2, we want to hear from you. What's one aha moment you've had while reading? Share your stories, your insights, your favorite reading techniques. We'll be back soon with more on how to level up your reading game.
That reminds me of when I was wrestling with this really dense philosophy book, and I was just stuck. I tried recording myself reading it aloud just to see, and honestly,
What happened?
it was like someone else was reading. I picked up on all these things I totally missed before.
It's amazing how just changing how you interact with the text can do that. Like unlock it. Speaking of unlocking, tip number 6 is all about reading aloud.
Yeah, I know, right? Sounds a bit old school.
Yeah, like elementary school. But the source makes a good case for it, especially for becoming more advanced readers.
Certainly.
They even suggest reading Shakespeare out loud, like those sonnets,
Oh, yeah.
to get the rhythm and flow. What's the idea there?
When you read silently, Don't you think you kind of skim? Your mind races ahead.
Oh, for sure.
But reading aloud, you got to slow down, enunciate every word, really savor the language. Like it adds this whole other dimension.
Almost like performing it, bringing it to life. So you pick up on those subtle things you might miss otherwise.
Exactly. And it's not just poetry. Think about a tough philosophical argument or even a legal document. Reading it aloud can make it so much clearer.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's like using more of your senses to really engage with it, which helps you remember it better too.
Right. And we learn language through hearing first, don't we? Yeah. So reading aloud kind of taps into that. Plus, it's like when we were kids reading aloud together.
Yeah.
Remember how much we absorbed?
I do. Those were great. And the source even says to try recording yourself reading aloud and listening back.
I know, it sounds a little weird.
Yeah, but it could be really helpful.
Absolutely. You can hear where you trip up, work on pronunciation, get more fluent overall. It's like having your own personal coach.
I gotta try that. Okay, last tip from the source. Goal setting. I'm a huge believer in goals, but I'm not always sure where to begin with reading. It can feel so overwhelming.
Yeah, I understand that. They use War and Peace as an example, which, yeah.
That's a big one, intimidating. But their point is, break it down.
Exactly. So instead of I'm going to read War and Peace, maybe it's I'm going to read 50 pages a week.
Right. Way less daunting.
And you get that feeling of accomplishment as you hit those smaller goals.
Which keeps you motivated. And there are great tools to help, like Goodreads. I love that. Seeing your progress, finding new books, sharing your thoughts.
It's such a great community for book lovers. And that brings us back to community in general, right?
Yeah. Book clubs, online groups, even just friends you swap books with. It makes a difference.
Totally. Having other readers around you, it's like a support system.
A cheering squad for your reading.
I like that. And with all this talk about tips and goals, it's important to remember, reading should be fun.
Oh, absolutely.
We can get so caught up in improving that we forget to enjoy a good book.
So true. It shouldn't feel like work.
It's like anything else. You got to find that sweet spot between challenge and pleasure.
All right. We've done a deep dive on these 7 tips, but before we go, I want to ask you, the listener, what really stuck with you?
Was there one that was like, aha, that's it?
Or maybe a challenge you're ready to tackle now?
Want to hear your thoughts. Reading is a journey, and the best ones are shared.
So let's keep talking. What are your favorite ways to level up your reading game? We'll be back with more soon. So we've been talking about all these great tips for becoming better readers. But sometimes, even with the best techniques, you just hit a wall.
For sure.
You get those books, those articles, even just certain paragraphs, and you're like, ugh, this is a struggle.
Yeah.
And it can be so discouraging. You're excited to read something new, and then it just doesn't click. What do you do when you run into that, when you're just not connecting?
Well, first you got to remember, it's okay. It's normal to struggle with certain things.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're a bad reader or that the writing is bad. Sometimes it's just not a good fit for you.
I like that, giving yourself permission to not love everything.
Exactly. Once you accept that, you can look at those tougher texts with more, maybe a little kindness towards yourself and curiosity.
So instead of getting frustrated, you ask, okay, what's making this hard for me?
Yeah. Is it the vocabulary, the sentences, the topic itself?
Right.
And once you figure out what it is, you can start to find ways to deal with it. Vocabulary. Maybe you grab the dictionary or look for clues in the surrounding words. Tricky sentences. Break them down into smaller parts. Or read them aloud. See if the rhythm helps.
You're like a reading detective, using your tools to crack the case.
I love that. And sometimes the best thing is to just walk away for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Go for a walk, listen to music, do something completely different. Come back with fresh eyes.
That distance can really help. It's like with a painting, you step back to see the whole picture.
Exactly. And honestly, remember that reading should be fun. If you're always fighting with it, feeling frustrated, maybe it's time to try something else.
I agree. A different genre, a new author, or even an old favorite that always makes you happy. There's so many amazing books out there. There's something for everyone.
For sure. The important thing is to find what you're curious about, what sparks your imagination.
As we wrap up this whole deep dive into reading, it keeps coming back to this. It's so personal.
It really is.
We can learn techniques, we can get better at it, but at the end of the day, it's that connection you make with what you're reading.
It's like connecting with another mind, even if they lived centuries ago, exploring new worlds, understanding ourselves and the universe better.
A journey of discovery. And like all good journeys, the best thing is to go with curiosity, a sense of wonder, and be open to getting a little lost along the way.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of wonder. That's the magic of reading.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you found some inspiration to level up your reading game. Until next time, happy reading.